It's week 16, and congratulations, you're almost there. It's the home stretch, just 2 more weeks until you get to hoist your trophy. I'm Jen Piacenti. Joining me today, Michael Fabiano, our senior fantasy analyst at SI Fantasy. And we're going to get these lineups rocking and rolling, Fabs. Let's start with the quarterback position. You like Geno Smith versus the Kansas City defense, who's been pretty generous this season.
By the way, it's Santa Fabs this week, yes. And Geno had a stinker last week, only 15 points, but he's been more good than bad this year. He's been a very nice Christmas gift, let's put it that way. All the Christmas jokes are coming, folks. The Chiefs, they have been bad against quarterbacks, the fourth most points allowed, 17.9 or more points to 10 different quarterbacks, including 20-plus points allowed 7 times. So Geno, in what should be a positive game script if you want Geno to score points in that game, should thrive. And I like Tom Brady this week. I've been down on him the last couple of weeks, and for really good reason. He hasn't been great, but I really like the matchup against the Cardinals. They've allowed the 8th most fantasy points to quarterbacks. 8 quarterbacks have scored at least 18.9 fantasy points against them, and 5 have gone over 25. This is a smash spot for Brady.
Despite Santa Fabs, he's not liking Dak Prescott this week. I mean, you got the hat on, and then you're telling me to sit Dak.
No.
I don't know how to feel about this. I have a feeling you're also going to talk to me a little bit about Jared Goff's road split, so give me the bad news.
I have to be unbiased. I hope Dak throws for 450 and 5 touchdowns, and I'm dead wrong. But I got to look at the numbers. I mean, Dak has scored 16.8 or fewer fantasy points in 3 of his last 4 games, and the Eagles have the toughest defense in the league against quarterbacks. So I'm just putting the numbers together. In a traditional 1-quarterback league, he's really no more than a low QB1, and Dak's been throwing interceptions lately too, which is not good. So if you start him, temper expectations. And yeah, I mean, Jared Goff, I've mentioned it, this guy gives out fantasy points at Ford Field like Santa on Christmas Eve, but on the road, he's kind of giving you a coal in your stocking, right? I mean, he's averaging fewer than 10 points per game on the road. He has 3 touchdown passes on the road. This week he's playing on the road against the Panthers, and they've allowed an average of fewer than 16 fantasy points per game to quarterbacks. So unless you reach the fantasy championship, which I hope you do, because he'll play at home against the Bears, I'm sitting Goff this week.
Yeah, it's tough to do, but I think you got to do it. All right, we're going to move to the running back position, and I think maybe we found this year's Rashad Penny and Jerick McKinnon. I mean, a little sore about this one because I definitely got ousted from a league this weekend, and it was certainly 100% due to Jerick McKinnon in the flex spot for my opponent. I'm still sore, but
I don't know how you don't play him.
All right.
I mean, 66.6 fantasy points, kind of an evil number, but pretty good in fantasy, right? I mean, over 30 points in 2 straight games, and now he's got Seattle, right? Their defense has allowed the 2nd most points to running backs, the 5th most catches, and the 4th most receiving yards to running backs. So, Jen, how can you afford not to play McKinnon this week? It's too good of a matchup, and he's been too hot. And then my guy, J.K. Dobbins, love the matchup against Atlanta. He's been hot in the 2 games since he's come back, 225 rushing yards, has scored a touchdown, 30% touch share. Atlanta's defense has allowed 18-plus points to 8 different running backs. So J.K. Dobbins should be an RB2.
Love J.K. Dobbins. Running backs to sit, Brian Robinson, and I know this had to hurt you to write this because I know he's one of your favorites. Donta Foreman seems to be losing playing time to Chuba Hubbard.
Right, and we'll start off in Washington with Robinson, who's looked really good lately. Right, he's running hard, 45.3 fantasy points in his last 3 games combined. But Niners, no bueno, no thank you. I mean, they've given up 5 touchdowns and the fewest fantasy points to running backs all year. And Robinson's still losing a little bit of burn to Antonio Gibson, so I'd fade him. And then Deontay, I love you, man. I've been fighting the good fight, but lately it's just not been good. The last couple of weeks have not been good for Deontay. Chuba Hubbard's been the better back in Carolina, and the Lions have quietly allowed the fewest fantasy points to running backs in the last 4 weeks. The Lions, it's crazy, right? So I can't play Foreman this week, unfortunately. If you're desperate, you could flex him. I just don't love the matchup, and I'm getting worried about the usage.
I understand. Yeah, it is crazy how the Detroit Lions have really tightened up that run defense. So be sure you pay attention to the most recent stats, and that's what we're here to give you. At wide receiver, Chris Olave and DJ Moore get a start for you this week.
Yeah, Olave burned us last week. The numbers weren't great against Atlanta. I'm going to keep the faith. I'm going to flex the rookie this week against the Cleveland Browns. The matchup is very good. They've allowed 12 touchdowns and the third most points to perimeter receivers. Olave is running about 70% of his routes out wide, so continue to play him. And I know DJ Moore, I mean, geez Louise, it's really hard to figure him out from one week to the next. But as good as the Lions have been against the run, they're not good against wide receivers. They've allowed the fifth most catches and the seventh most fantasy points to perimeter receivers. And we know Sam Darnold likes to throw to DJ Moore, so he's in the flex conversation.
The quarterback situation in Arizona is absolutely a mess, and I'm assuming that's why you're saying we should sit Hollywood Brown this week.
Yeah, no question. You're looking at a third-string quarterback there in Trace McSorley. That's not good. And then you look at the matchup against the Buccaneers. It's not that it's an awful matchup, that it's a great matchup. It's all about the quarterback situation. The Cardinals' offense is a mess. I mean, even Nuke Hopkins didn't have a huge game last week, so I'd beware of Hollywood. And Deontay Johnson, who had a good game last week. It was his best game of the year. He had 20 points. But if Kenny Pickett is back this week, he likes to throw the ball to George Pickens more than DJ. And then the matchup's not great against the Raiders. By the way, great all-time AFC rivalry going on at the formerly stadium known as the Big Ketchup Bottle. The Raiders have allowed just 3 touchdowns and the 6th fewest fantasy points to perimeter receivers. So you may not want to chase the points with Johnson if Pickett is back this week for Pittsburgh.
It's kind of hard to believe that it's come to this, but you actually feel it's important to tell us we should start Mark Andrews.
Right. This is crazy. This is how crazy this season has been. Never in my wildest dreams did I think that I'd have to tell you to start Mark Andrews. You know why, Jen? I've been telling people to sit him for a few weeks now, and he's been bad. 7 points per game in his last 7 games. This is Mark Andrews we're talking about, but Atlanta is awful against tight ends. They've allowed the 4th most points to the position. They just gave up 2 touchdowns to Juwan Johnson. So hopefully Mark Andrews will bring you the gift of a good stat line because he hasn't had many lately. And then Pat Freiermuth. Last week, I had the same number of points as him. Yeah, that's not good. 0. But I know that he's a risk. If Pickett is back, I like him much more against Las Vegas. Their defense has allowed 6 touchdowns and the 9th most points at tight ends. If it's Trubisky, I'm a little bit worried. If it's going to go back to Pickett, I feel a little bit better about Freiermuth, and the matchup obviously is favorable.
As far as tight ends, you don't like Cole Kmet versus the Bills or Dawson Knox, who actually had a really big week last week versus Miami, but Miami is notoriously bad versus the tight end. In fact, you know, if Robert Tunyon's available on your waiver wire, he's possibly streamable. So you're sitting Cole Kmet and Dawson Knox.
And I told you I didn't like Kmet last week, and he had a stinker. And I get it. He's like the only receiver that Justin Fields has right now, but it didn't matter last week. Defenses also know that. He's failed to score more than 6.5 fantasy points in 3 of his last 4 games, and he's touchdown dependent. And guess how many touchdowns the Bills have given up to tight ends this year? 0. They've also allowed an average of fewer 9 fantasy points per game to tight ends. So I would prefer not to touch Cole Kmet with a 39.5-foot pole. Hopefully you got that reference. And then Dawson Knox, you're right, Jen. He's been on fire. 35.9 fantasy points in his last 2 games. So a lot of people are going to start him in a thin position, and I totally get it. But the Bears have allowed just 3 touchdowns at tight ends. Just 2 players at the position have scored more than 8.2 points against them. Now, you could say that's because the level of the opponents have not been great, and that would be fair. But the numbers suggest Dawson Knox should be on your bench or a risk-reward tight end 1.
There you go, guys. That's it. That's the best advice we've got right now for week 16. But guess what? We'll be updating the fantasy rankings every single day. We're going to be with you all the way up to kickoff on Saturday. We've got games on Saturday, games on Sunday, and then, of course, that Monday night sweat. We'll be here for it. We'll be here for it next week when you're setting your championship lineups. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and check us out at si.com.